Close your eyes and picture a door handle. What does it look like? You're probably imagining something simple, sleek, clean, maybe something that looks like this, or if you really want to get crazy, maybe even something like this. But why didn't you picture something that looks like this, or this, or this? Question on the top of my mind is, why have we become so boring? For the past 3 years or so, I've lived in and around Miami, and every day I would walk past construction sites to Brickell, a neighborhood of sleek skyscrapers that have all been built in about the last 40 years. I grew up in cities and I love skyscrapers. I would often go on walks through Miami at night and look up at these monuments of human engineering and admire how they lit up the sky. But for the past month or so, I've been living in Europe, and nothing could be more antithetical to Miami than Provence. I spent a couple of weeks there and was admiring a different type of beauty. It was a beauty of uneven stone buildings, cobblestone paths, and intricate door handles. It sounds corny, but just walking through the alleyways felt like a conversation with the past. It wasn't too hard to imagine somebody not too different from me walking through the same alleyway hundreds of years ago. And I get it, it's all very romantic to admire the historic sites and frolic in the French countryside, but the world has come a long way. We invented cities for a reason. They're convenient, efficient, full of energy, and can hold a lot more people. And I certainly couldn't imagine living in the French countryside for any longer than a couple weeks. But cities aren't perfect. As much as I like to admire the grandiosity and scale of the modern municipality, after a while you can't help but realize that they're kind of boring. Take these American skylines, for example. Nothing really distinguishes them from each other except for the number of skyscrapers. But by and large, you could take any one of these buildings, plop it down in any of the other cities, and nobody would bat an eye. And that becomes increasingly more problematic when you realize that these aren't American skylines, but these are skylines from every continent around the globe. Look at historic Miami and historic Frankfurt. They look nothing alike. But now look at new Miami and new Frankfurt. Sure, there are some differences in the skyline, but these two cities have completely different cultures, completely different histories, completely different surrounding environments. Should they really look this similar? How does this all relate to the original concept I started this video with, of simplicity? It seems like so many cities today have lost respect for their heritage. Instead of referencing the things that make these areas unique, their points of reference are just other cities. Now, I'm not an architect and I'm clearly not in the room when these buildings are being designed. But when it's time to put up a new office building in Frankfurt, it seems like the references up on the inspiration board are not nods to the local history, geography, and culture. Instead, it seems like the references are just other cities and other modern designs that propagates an endless cycle of copies of copies of copies that can only converge on uniformity. And the result is just boring. And I don't think I need to labor my complaints on this point. I have friends who live in this apartment building in Miami. It's nice, sleek, new, modern, fancy, but you don't need to be an architect to see how boring and simple it is. Smooth, clean lines, repetitive patterns, and two copy-paste designs right next door. Contrast that with these buildings in Nice, where you have intricate bevels, ornate patterns, and interesting doorknobs. It just feels so much more lively, like there's effort being put into the environment around you to remind you that you're not just a commoditized robot
that could be replaced by the person across the hall or across the street.
And pause. There's probably somebody watching this video who's ready to type out,
"Bro, it's not that deep. They're just buildings. Stop trying to fit it into some idealistic agenda."
Fair. But it's not just buildings. You can see the same pattern in our logos and even our writing. Look at this tweet that came up on my timeline the other day. The best authors write at a 5th grade level. Why? Because they know that good writing is understood by a select few, but great writing can be understood by anyone. When in doubt, break things down into a more simple format. And at first glance, that sounds pretty base, but these things around us are not meaningless. Each of us is shaped by two forces. One, our inner world, our soul, our being, our mind, our spirit, our thoughts, whatever you want to call it. And two, our outer world, our environment, the people around us, and the artifacts that we interact with. These things are an extension of ourselves. You behave differently when you're sitting in an office compared to when you're sitting in the forest. You think differently when your workspace is clean compared to when it's messy. And you feel differently when you're looking at a painting compared to when you're looking at your phone. These external artifacts shape our perception of ourselves, and they shape our perception of the world. If we're living in a society that obsesses over simplification, is it any wonder that we're so divided? How are we supposed to arrive at common ground on ethical matters, let alone basic facts, if we're all expected to read and write at a 5th grade level? How are we supposed to believe in, or even attempt to understand complex social issues, if every artifact around us is telling us that simplicity is the highest virtue? And how are we supposed to wrap our head around leaving the planet better for our grandchildren when all of the buildings around us have been put up in the last 40 years? And I'm not saying simplicity doesn't have its place. It can be beautiful, necessary, and true. But things should be as simple as they need to be. No more, no less. As much as we strive for simplicity, we also have to embrace nuance, fall in love with detail, and appreciate the ornate, because it means a lot more than just doorknobs.